Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this talk, which I've been looking forward to for a long time. I met Marta Turok in my very first week on this job, way back in June of 2019, and she opened my eyes to one of the many collections within this great permanent collection that I was entirely unaware of. So we're going to dive deep into this today, this body of work, the Rebozo, these shawls that are the product of a really rich folk art tradition in Mexico. And we have one of the world's leading experts on that tradition to come and speak with us today. Marta came to study the objects that she'll be sharing with us at our Peebles Island Collections Care Facility, part of the New York State Park System that oversees Olana. And came down to Olana that day rather spontaneously with our wonderful librarian and archivist Ida Breyer, who offered her a lift. So we were able to show her around this site and give her a better sense how the textiles she came to see fit into this larger project of Olana. So it'll be wonderful to put her on the spot and have her speak to all of us about this body of work and why it is so important. She is, among many other commitments, curator of the Ruth de Lechuga Center for Folk Art Studies at the FRANZ MAYER Decorative Arts Museum in Mexico City. She's had a really rich and diverse career that I hope you'll hear a little taste of, and I'll make sure to ask questions about it if it doesn't come up in the talk, between government and private NGOs that are advocating for textile preservation. One of those organizations she founded was the Asociación Mexicana de Arte y Cultura Popular. She has written widely about Mexican lacquer, serapes, and rebozos, including the conservation of the coveted Murex purple dye. That book was The Purpura Snail, a millenary tradition in Oaxaca. She's also written the book How to Approach Crafts, and wrote a really intriguing essay I'd love to read someday on the sources of Frida Kahlo's garments for a book called Frida's Wardrobe. She is, among many other things, proficient in the Tzotzil Maya language and weaving on the backstrap loom. So please join me in welcoming Marta Turok, who will be speaking on Mexican Rebozo shawls at Olana and beyond, from uncertain origins to compromised future. And let's see if there's Marta now. Excellent.
Here I am.
Welcome, Marta.
Hi, thanks. Thanks so much. Well, before I share my screen, I want to thank Will. As he said, it was his first week and I bombarded him. And I had just come in from the Peebles Island Resource Center looking at the 8 Rebozos. So why don't we get started, because I have a lot of slides and a lot of information to share. I also want to thank all my friends who signed up. How you found out, I don't know, but I'm glad you're there. And to all my new friends or friends in process, I hope you enjoy my talk. Are we going? Are we ready?
Perfect.
Okay. No, we're not, because it's not moving. We tried it. I swear we tried it. There we go. Okay. Well, I want to dedicate this presentation to the many Rebozo and fringe makers who over the years have shared their knowledge, their concerns, and their, as we say in Spanish, alegrías, which are happy moments. I also want to thank the researchers who have delved into the enigmas of the origin of the Rebozo, and especially to Virginia Davis, the pioneer on Olana Rebozos, and Hilary Steele, generous teachers and colleagues in the search for the origin of the Rebozo. I chose this image which is a sketch for the south facade of the main house at Olana that Frederick Church painted in 1860, I think. I can't see that little corner of my presentation. And I'll tell you why. A timeline lost in time. It's a play on words. In 1867, 1868, the Church family travels to Europe and the Near East. They go, well, through Europe and then from Palestine to Istanbul. And they bring back extensive collections, including textiles and a love for the architecture and art of that region. Olana is built honoring the aesthetic legacy of what was to be known as Orientalism. However, in 1879, the church family travels to Mexico. And from 1881 to 1899, they would winter in Mexico. When his wife passes away in 1899, they don't return. He passes away in 1900. And one of the things that's interesting that he works on what is called the Morelia. Morelia is the capital city of the state of Michoacan in Western Mexico. He works on the Morelia sketchbook from 1893 to 1898, already suffering from severe arthritis. Now, this takes us to attribution woes, because in 1993, Deborah Lee Trumpin and Estelle Whelan, who worked for the Protection Services of New York, published a paper called In Search of Alaja, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, an experiment in matching text to textile. And it's published in Studies of Decorative Arts. It's 27 pages long. They review these 8 shawls in the Olana collection, and they assume they are from the Near East. In fact, they go to great extent. It is so well documented. So then what happened? So they explained that alaja is a variegated IKAT dyed muslin cloth with gilded threads, a woman's garment, of which there are four of the Rebozos, and dima, a pattern weave look-alike. So that there are 3 of those. So that's 7 out of 8. And however, the 8th Rebozo is a problem for them. They can't place it. So in general, they have a problem with the measurements of these shawls, and they come to the conclusion that they are men's sashes. So now we have a fortuitous petition, and the record is set clear. At the end of the article, published in Decorative Arts, there's an editor's note. And it says, the authors would like to hear of comparable pieces. See research inquiries. So then it turns out, because this we find out from Virginia Davis a few years later, Milton Sunday, curator of textiles at the Cooper Hewitt National Design Museum in New York City, Virginia tells us, he immediately doubted this provenance, that is, the Syrian provenance, and identified the 8 shawls as Mexican Rebozos. He suggests Virginia Davis study them, and she spent some time at Olana. They were still on the premises then. So in 1997, Virginia publishes Frederick Edwin Church's Acquisition of Mexican Textiles. So it's a few years later, and she's able to review the textiles, the library, she's able to see personal correspondence, and she discovers that there, in one letter, after the mother dies, in one letter, Church addresses his daughters and says, give this Rebozo here, give this Rebozo there, actually talks about them as shawls. No idea, no details of where they were bought or place of manufacture, which is a constant problem for all of us studying old Rebozo making, and the provenance is extremely difficult. So what we have is a fraction of what they actually bought. So I'm going to show you, these are the 4 IKAT Rebozos, IKAT dyed Rebozos, of which number 1 and number 3 have metal coiled threads in them. And I want you to notice how 1 and 3 are vertical and how 2 and 4 have more designs, more like diamond designs, and each one of them has a different fringe. These would be 5 and 6, and 5 and 6 are pattern weave as IKAT lookalikes, which is interesting because this happened in Mexico very frequently, even in the 30s, 40s, 50s, as they lost the tradition of doing IKAT in many places. They found a way to do pattern weave to look like it. So number 5 on the left, number 6 on the right are these pattern weaves. And I took from the photographs, the color photographs I took, some close-ups so that you can get an idea. On number 6, it's important to look at the fringe because that fringe is going to come up also. Number 7 is a jacquard loom woven rebozo. The fringe comes from the fringe is part of the warp threads. So it was planned to be a rebozo from its inception. And number 8 is a silk striped rebozo with fringes that are very similar to the ones that we saw above. So here I am, a visit to the Peebles Island Resource Center to meet the rebozos in living color, which was something that I was looking forward to in early June 2019. I'm talking with Sarah Stevens. Actually, we're both sort of moving our hands and we're excited about something. And Mary Saransky is there, and 2 other people are taking my photograph. Are helping out. So anyway, so you look at me practically with my head in the textile. For those of you who are not textile buffs, I do recommend, if you want to look at a textile into the nitty gritty of the textile, you get a thread counter, because then you can see when it's IKAT, when it's pattern weave, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a very exciting session. I saw all 8 of the rebozos. What's a rebozo? For those of you who don't know, I am going to quickly sort of give you an overview of the history of the Mexican rebozo, what we know and what we don't know, and also give you a quick run through of how they're made, because this is part of the story that I'm telling today. The enigmas of the rebozo. Enigma number 1, where and how did the garment originate? Enigma number 2, when was jaspe, which is a Spanish word for IKAT, technique incorporated? That we have found no pre-Hispanic evidence of IKAT in Mesoamerica. We have found batik and plangi or shibori, 1 in 1 piece. And the third the third question is, how and when did the knotted fringe come about? And that one is really stumping us more than the other questions. So what we have is this wonderful painting from 1858 with a man with a beautiful serape, the man's garment, and a woman with her shiny skirt, her blouse, and her rebozo draped over the back. And this is a procession of the of Holy Week. And this comes, its portrayal shows us how important these 2 garments were. They became emblematic elements of costume throughout the colonial period, the 19th century, and I would say the 20th century, maybe till the 60s, 70s. Now, what do we have for pre-Hispanic roots? We have a mantle, a MAMALLI or a MAMATL carrying cloth. You can see the bride has a mantle over her head, and the amanteca, her godmother, is carrying her with a longer garment with a knot at the top. We really can't see fringes. Then we have another codice where over the shoulders and also knotted, they're carrying various things, including a child right there, including a child with a mask. And we have a depiction of the backstrap loom that we know is at least 3,000 or 4,000 years old. Then we've got Hispanic roots. The Catholic religion that came and was imposed called for head coverings and demureness as a symbol of demureness, as one of the researchers who's just gotten her PhD and has an exhibit up in Mexico City at the Museum of Folk Art if you come through Mexico City in the next 6 months. So there was the lace mantilla to cover your head and go into the church, but only the Spanish women or the daughters of Spaniards born in New Spain could wear the lace mantilla. Then we have the word rebozo or rebocino that stands for a garment that covers the mouth and the neck. So this is sort of where we're going through a term, through a garment. Then when we start looking at the fringe, usually there are many of the researchers say, well, we've got to look at the mantón de Manila. The mantón de Manila is this large square with a fringe around it, that the square is embroidered, and that was embroidered in China, sent to Manila, and then sent on the Manila galleon through New Spain, traveled across Mexico to Veracruz, to get on another ship to get to Andalusia, where the gypsies became very well known for it. At what point that fringe is attached, we have no idea. We don't know. There's very little fringe history in Asia, and we don't have evidence of the fringe in Mexico. And in Spain, they talk about it being 1860s when they have their own tradition. So that's one of these enigmas. Now, it also turns out that there are Moorish roots, and there is a garment called the ALMALAFA that seems to have come to America. I've seen similar drawings in Peru and Ecuador, and you can see that she can just see out of one eye. So here's another possible element for the origin of the rebozo. And also some of these almalafas talk about having a fringe. So we need, more research, or for our dear friend Ana Paulina Gámez to publish her PhD, because we're dying to find out. So if we put it all together, a rebozo is equal to a MAMALLI plus a rebocillo plus an almalafa plus knotted and plaited fringes from the Mantón de Manila plus IKAT or the jaspe technique, a true enigma. However, by the 16th, 17th century, the rebozo develops among the castes, particularly the mulatas, that were the combination of Black women with indigenous. The black women, there was a very strong trade with Africa for slavery in Mexico too. And then a Moorish, it's called Morisca, a Moorish caste, which is not necessarily a Moorish person. So, it gets a little complicated there. But if you look at these little squares, you can see that almost all of the women are wearing a rebozo. So this it starts out not as an Indian garment, it starts out at the castes. It's not a Spanish garment either. By the 19th century, you can see that they're wearing it, all colors, all flavors, the country women, the indigenous woman here down at the bottom. She's wearing a beautiful blue and white IKAT rebozo. And it's a vivid presentation and way of dressing in Mexico. Even by the 20th century, we have rebozos by class. This would be a poor woman with her husband's in the army. These would be middle-class women, and this would be a higher-class woman. They're all wearing rebozos. What would the difference be? The materials, the size, the degree of IKAT involved. In other words, the garment cuts across all classes, and yet the difference lies in the quality of the materials and the quality of the IKAT. These come from these three come from the FRANZ MAYER Museum, just to give you an idea, so you get a feeling of color, of shape, of different kinds of fringes. This is a beautiful, beautiful rebozo that's part of the National Institute of Indigenous Peoples Here we have more, the FRANZ MAYER Robert Everts. Robert Everts was a Belgian diplomat, and he was 25 years old, and he came to Mexico. He was here 5 years, and he had a great eye because he bought serapes and rebozos and glass and charro, the charro fittings, and fabulous collection. And we were very, very fortunate for his daughter to be interested in sending the Rebozos back to Mexico. So at that point, the FRANZ MAYER was able to buy the Rebozos. At this point, it would be very difficult. So we're lucky we have 18 Robert Everts Rebozos, undated, no attribution. So they're a part of this putting things together. Now here what I did was I sort of matched. This would be a FRANZ MAYER, very intricate IKAT with number 4, with Olana number 4, where you get the same feeling of diamonds and zigzags. Here we have a vertical one, a FRANZ MAYER and Olana number 1. So we're seeing certain parallelisms, but these are later. The Olana ones, these Olana ones are later. Here we have number 1 again, number 3, number 2, and one of the things that catches my attention is that practically all of them are brown and indigo blue, except for the striped one that we will see. Even the jacquard woven one is blue and off-white. And so I don't know if this was what was being offered, or if this is what caught their eye, or if the ones that they gave away had more color. We'll never know. Now here's one kind of rebozo. The FRANZ MAYER has 2 storytellers, and I have been able to identify about 16, 17 extant in the world. Some are in England, many are in the States, some are in Mexico, some are in private collections. And these are dated 1750 to 1810. They're usually cotton, silk, and metallic threads. They're embroidered. They have simple fringes. They might have been made in India. My hunch is that the Coromandel coast has similar embroideries for other purposes, not necessarily a rebozo. Could they have had a relationship with China, with the Philippines? These are things that we need to do more research on, more archival work probably. And this is the beginning of what we would call the Spanish-Mexican criollo identity. The criollo is the son and the daughters of Spaniards born in America. And they are the ones who are going to assume an identity and say, well, we're not really from Spain. Plus, they don't have any rights. You can get off the boat and come to Mexico, and you have more rights than the son and the daughter of Spaniards born in Mexico. And they're the ones who spearhead the independence movement. So here we have Olana number 3, Rebozo number 3, and I want you to notice how similar the IKAT stripes and the motifs, the S motif, the columns, what they call Llovizna motif, and starkingly similar are the pile fringes also. I think, and I don't want to be chauvinistic at all. However, in due fairness, the detail of the FRANZ MAYER's pile is a little better than the one at Olana. My hunch is that this is an earlier piece and this is a later piece. Not by much, but we're already beginning to see that there's a decrease in either access to the raw material or in quality. And then I'm associating another rebozo, excuse me, we're not talking about huipiles, we're talking about rebozos, from the Pátzcuaro region, Pátzcuaro Paracho region. These are woven on a backstrap loom by Purépecha women, and they also do a pile fringe, not with triangles. And look at this figure. It is so reminiscent of the other, it's like an eagle, they call it an eagle. It's reminiscent of the other fringes that we were looking at. So were these rebozos, were these pile fringe rebozos from Michoacan? Would that be a path to lead? It would be interesting. Here we have that the rebozo de Guare, which is a nickname for Purépecha indigenous women, with that same fringe without the pile and the wide stripes. And we have on the right a similar rebozo to the one before in blue, and you can clearly see the eagle. The eagle is clear to see in this pile fringe. Well, let's move on now into rebozos woven in the late 19th, early 20th century on what we know now are English mechanical looms in Moroleón, Guanajuato. They may have existed in Puebla and in Querétaro, near Mexico City to the east. But we do know that there are and there were these English mechanical looms in Moroleón. I had been looking for the provenance of the three rebozos on the right that I've been holding on for years. And I kept saying, this is a jacquard loom or a jacquard type loom. And a professor from that area, from the Guanajuato area, called me and all excited and said, we found a workshop still in production. I said, they've got to be in production because they're being mass produced and mass sold all over the place. And people think that they are a rebozo and all they are is a shawl. However, since they do the fringing, well, you might think that it is a true rebozo. It's a rebozo style mechanical English loom. So this is like something new. The workshop was found not too long ago. We're very excited. We want to go and interview the owner and try to get more information as to when the looms came in. Are they the end of the 19th century? Because that would help us a lot with the Olana number 7 jacquard. It would date the machine, if not these in particular, but the coming to Mexico of these jacquard machines and being set up to weave rebozo. So we're excited. You see, you never stop learning and you never stop researching. You just got to ask a lot of questions and be patient. So we have in Mexico the word shawl, chal, rebozo, and chalina. And I have a saying, every rebozo is a shawl, but not every shawl is a rebozo. And I won't go into it in this talk because that's a lot of detail. But I will say this, the word chal comes from the Persian shawl. All three of them are women's overall garments. And the differences have evolved by region, technique, and design. So a classic rebozo is a two-part art done by two or more specialized artisans. We have the body done with IKAT or jaspe reserve technique, done by either one or various people. We'll see why. And the fringe or rapacejo can be knotted, netted, and or plaited. And that's done by women, mostly women. Now men are starting to do it because it's an interesting economic proposition. And so we have already this vision that we're talking about a garment that is done in one place and then is distributed among other women in the outlying communities to be fringed. A chalina would be a solid or striped rebozo made in the same communities without the IKAT. And one of the things that I noticed a few years back, maybe 10 years ago, was that they were selling these shawls, these solid rebozos, more expensive than an IKAT rebozo. And I spoke to the community, to Tenancingo. I said, we have a problem here where the fringers think that their work is more valuable than the Rebozo, the IKAT, and you cannot compare the amount of work that goes into the IKAT. There can be some very, very elaborate fringes. However, we have to find a way to balance value. So we tried inviting the fringers to some of the workshops so that they could see all the process this entailed. And now we have the third kind of rebozo that we call the regional or Indian rebozo, that are always solid or striped cotton, cotton rayon, silk body or wool, and elaborate special fringes. No IKAT left in these rebozos. There is IKAT, or there was IKAT in a kishkemetal, a triangular cape, but that died out. So we have cotton. Cotton was once 200, 140, 120, 100 caliber, very fine cotton. And these all died out. Now, if they want 80, they have to do a special order with only one producer in Mexico. And normally they're doing 60. It's still pretty fine, but we're talking about, coarse hair to fine hair. It can be silk. The silk is imported from China. There is a local production in the state of San Luis Potosí, but they haven't been able to get it to the quality that they do for the Chinese imported. There was silk production in Mexico up through the 1920s. And there is a raw silk production that is used for other kinds of shawls. And finally, we have a lot of use of artificial silk or rayon or acetate. They're similar. And it's artificial, it's not synthetic because it's processed from wood pulp. And it was developed at the end of the 19th century and arrived in Mexico around 1930, 1920 is when it arrived here. Now, we're going to talk about very quickly the 14 to 17 steps it takes to make a rebozo. And especially right now, what I have here are the treadle loom rebozos. We'll see that in a minute, where you need 6 to 8 hands, 3, 4, 5 people to help work out this, but you get a longer warp, much longer warp. So the first thing is you wash the fiber. The second thing is you can bleach it unless it's a bleached cotton. Then you wind it on these turn of the 20th century winders. It's sort of like archaeological industrial equipment that they use. And then you get the warping, and the warping that is here in the photograph is for a treadle loom. Now they count 4,008 threads, and if it's a backstrap loom woven rebozo, it would be 5,400. So we're already talking about differences in quality, differences in the density of the weave. Then they have to count the cordones. These are groupings of about 80 threads to draw on. Here what you have is a frame where the warp was totally placed, going and coming, and this man is drawing the design. They can draw by hand, or they can have rollers or stamps to stamp on. And here the design is being bound. Here we can see how it's bound. They bound right in between the two markings. Then they have to dye. They have to dye the warp and put sizing on it. Here we can see it dyed and sizing, and then they have to stretch the warp out and unbind, and they have to be very careful that they knot always at the top, so that when they come through with their blunt knife, they cut the knots and they don't cut the warp, because sometimes the weavers complain that the people doing it aren't paying attention, and they're having to hand tie each little warp that was cut when they unbound. And here we can see what it looks like, what the warp looks like after it's been unbound. So then in Mexican rebozos, you don't get, well, we'll see the scale, but there's another step that is very tricky, and they integrate what they call the cloth, which is where the IKAT cordones are to the solid background. And so what we have here are two sets, and what we have here is the IKAT and the solid, and the IKAT and the solid, and the IKAT, and that's how you get design. Now, designs can vary, and they can vary so much. I'm trying to learn, and I'm still trying to learn all of the variations. So here you can see a very small scale, that is in the process for maybe 2 or 3 solid colors. You're going to have 2 or 3 IKATs. Here you get more of a sense of the size of the design. And here, this is an innovation. This we hadn't seen since the 19th century, 18th century Rebozos, where there are no solid colors in the design. The solid colors are on the edge. So all of this is going on, plus the fringing. Here we have the other case, which is the backstrap loom, pre-Hispanic backstrap loom, also used to make rebozos, and there you can only do them one at a time. Don Evaristo Borboa Casas, who was 93 this 2 days ago, 93 and going strong. He's slowed down a little bit. He's not weaving as much. He's got problems with high blood pressure, but he's always got a big smile for all of us who call him and say hello or go and visit him. And the same backstrap loom was used in Tenancingo until the 20s or 30s when the treadle looms were brought in. And Don Evaristo was almost the last one. He now has one wonderful student, and there are a couple of other young people who are working their rebozos. In the state of San Luis Potosí that works with silk, the whole community only does silk, backstrap loom woven, IKAT rebozos, and solid shawls. So we have a big imbalance there in terms of existing techniques. This would be setting up the loom. To set the loom up, you need 3 people. So it's very labor intensive, and we'll see other aspects. Here's the tools that the Spanish brought. The loom itself developed in the 11th, 12th century and was the most modern piece of equipment when the Spaniards came and conquered Mexico and introduced this loom for many other things, used basically by men. And here we can see how the weaver has the warp, his IKAT warp goes above him, and it meshes with his solid background, so that he's working. He's got these ties right here, so that, as in silk screen, so that the register is maintained. Then on the treadle loom rebozos, they'll weave a few, and then they'll cut so that they can send it off to be fringed. Fringe making can be 7 to 60 days. It depends on the fineness of thread, the number of threads that are used, the design. This would be a very fine fringe for Santa Maria del Rio. Here you get an idea of how they do it. I'm trying to see what my time frame is to see if I can give you just a snippet. Here we have Marilu Morales. She's a fringe expert. She has an incredibly wonderful collection that she's made by her work in the Cultural Center in Tenancingo. And we have Virginia Davis to the right, filming Marilu, and Virginia Sinatra, an American who lives in Tenancingo and is also a very helpful person in terms of knowing the reboceros. Fringe making, well, you can do 2 colors, you can do 1 color, they over dye, and you can do different designs with different effects. Here's what they would call a modern design. This is the most complex. They call it cordón partido, where they'll start with 8 and then go to 4 and then go to 2. And that's how you get this wonderful detail on the butterflies. And I will only, if it comes up, let's go. Yes. Well, I'll just show you a couple of seconds of this. This was a course we gave to young girls. So you can see how she's counting the threads, and then the one that's going to go through, she's going to put over. In this case, she goes under, and then she can go over. So she's already worked all of these diamonds. Well, just to give you an idea of the movement. And then the last step is they actually use these very heavy logs to press the rebozos. And when I took some colleagues who are experts in restoration and conservation, they cringed. They were going, oh my God, they're breaking the threads. But this is done once, and it gives it a shine. It pulls the rebozo through, and so the cotton rebozo shine beautifully. So now let's go to the sort of the end of the third part of my presentation, which are links and losses, rebozos as an example of a tradition at risk. I did an assessment in 1999 of both the sarape and the rebozo. I had spent so many years working with indigenous people and working with them because they were the underdogs, and we all were concentrating on helping them use their knowledge and use their crafts as means of income. And I really, it was very worrisome what I found in this assessment. That was the critical situation of treadle loom woven cotton and rayon rebozos. What's the first thing I found? Older artisans. And why were there older artisans? There were hardly any young people learning. And what they told me was, if I'm not at the top of the ladder, which means I'm a weaver or I'm the owner of the workshop, I'm not going to be able to have a family, generate enough income for the 4 other people that participate in various aspects of the division of labor. I'm not going to go into detail. So the parents of the owners told their kids, go to school. You don't want to live off rebozos. And so bye-bye most of the rebozo owners' children. And then I started noticing that what I call generation gaps. And that's when I realized that maybe right now we have people who are 50 that are doing some of this piece work, but they're going to be 70, 80, and there's nobody underneath. And so this problem of the generation gaps in the production scheme, I said, you know what, in a generation or less, we're going to lose many of the workshops. And in 2012, when I was able to get a grant and go all over Mexico, it was very worrisome. Now, what was another aspect? The drastic loss of rebozo use and sales in traditional markets. Why? Because discrimination and racism has had the indigenous women, and especially the mestizo women, being called country bumpkins. So they don't want to be a country bumpkin. They're going to take an acrylic shawl, or they're going to buy a sweater and buy rebozos. And they're going to stop carrying their babies with a rebozo, and they're going to buy these little kangaroo things. And the other problem that was scaling was scarcity of good quality raw materials, lack of supply, and lack of credits, lack of help, other than Santa Maria del Rio, where the government has helped them since 1950s. And also a lack of recognition through the Ministry of Education that being a craftsperson in general, being a rebocero specifically, is worth something. The parents would tell me, I want my son to be somebody in life, and they don't have a diploma, and so I don't want them to do this. So this took me to many years and ongoing project of strategies for survival. The first thing I thought, innovation. How can we innovate? There's product development, author recognition, incentivate creativity, find ways of getting financial support to the producers. So one of the first things that happened was getting Don Evaristo to be known, because he did get the National Arts and Science Award in 2005, but I had been pushing him and working with him since the end of the 1980s and had gotten pieces into contests. And little by little, people started understanding that he was the most creative rebozo maker at that time in Mexico. So this is a special rebozo he did for Dr. Lechuga with 20 different squares of designs. He said, never more, one is enough. This is Arturo Estrada Hernandez, who started rebozo making at 9 years of age. And he benefited when I brought Ana Roquero, the leading natural dye expert of the whole continent and Spain and Portugal. I brought her to Santa Maria del Rio, and he was the most outstanding student. And he is just taken off in the last few years. This rebozo he has here, he called it the Rebozo for inclusion, and it has the colors for the gay pride. And then what's the future? Well, in 2013, I caught on internet this young man doing backstrap loom with IKAT cotton. And so I contacted him, and he's Jaime Ferreira. He just graduated, he's a historian, but he loves to weave. And he went to a 1 week course to Jiquilpan, where they have a little school. And in 1 week, he understood what it's all about, and he is unstoppable. So what am I finding? That you can become a very successful artisan by vocation and talent, not necessarily by tradition. You don't have to be born in it in order to be able to contribute to the future of rebozos. He's had problems with recognition in his state, and we're working on that. Camelia and José Malinalco own El Xochopastle in the state of Mexico, and they've cornered an upscale market in cotton, special backstrap loom. They've also brought in treadle loom pieces. Some are pieced out to Tenancingo, others they do on their loom there. They work with special colors. Camelia has an incredible sense of color, and they introduced the triangular fringes, which for some reason that I still don't understand, she called them Spanish fringes. So Santa Maria del Rio produces rayon silk and silk, and another community called La Piedad does lookalikes that can be sold as Santa Maria or silk, and that's a problem because if you don't know the difference, you might be charged a lot of money for something that isn't the real McCoy, as we would say. Now, which of all of the rebozos is at highest risk? In my opinion, by just looking, by going to the communities, the classic cotton and rayon silk treadle loomed are at the highest risk because they're the most economic. I don't like to say cheap and I don't like to say expensive. They're the most economic. And so when I started working with that group of rebozo makers, I said, you've got to innovate. You've got to find a way. What were they producing? Blue and white, black and white, gray and white, brown and white. And I said, people, the consumer you want associates that with old ladies, country bumpkins, and they're going to want something a little brighter. So I was able to convince them little by little to start bringing color in, not to necessarily even change their IKAT, although a lot of them worked with larger scale design. Then, not by me, a lot of other people, both artisans and designers, started buying the cloth and cutting it up. And so they innovated by doing shoes and bags with leather, very fancy, or using a shawl and cutting out the neck, or combining cotton and rayon silk to make it shiny. Mexican women like things to shine for some reason. And all of these are from Tenancingo. Well, my friend Fito, who's a wonderful artisan, very dedicated and has now set up a school in Tenancingo. When he saw the shoes, he cried over my shoulder and he said, Marta, how can that be? How can a rebozo, let alone it being cut up, be dragging itself on the floor, you know, with all of the dirt and the dust? And he was very sad. And I said, Fito, what we're trying to do is get the word out of what a rebozo is, what IKAT is, because that's the one in highest risk. And maybe at some point we can get everybody also involved in rebozos and maybe less shoes, hopefully. Then we have fashion. We have design and innovation in fashion with, curiously enough, 3 students of mine, Carla Fernandez, Lydia, and Carmen, and the pioneer was Beatriz Rusek with an incredible sense of style. And most of them, what all 4 of them have done is hardly cut into it. They've found a way so that you get the fullest use of the rebozo. Maggie Galton, an American who's lived in Mexico for 25 years, set up Honora with a partner, and she's been doing interior decoration and has been very successful with her products. So what are the challenges the rebozo and jaspe IKAT producers are facing? The rebozo at highest risk, as I already pointed out, is the lower priced treadle loom, cotton, and rayon silk. Virtually no younger people entering the trade, and these are rebozos that wholesale between $30 and $80. Designers who do product development and fashion with rebozo cloth and fringing rely on a steady supply of lower priced rebozos. So right there, we're talking about, you know, we've got a problem coming up. Luxury and finer cotton or silk backstrap woven rebozos with innovative colors and designs show more vitality and command higher prices from $500 to $2,000. Arturo's is getting, I think he's priced the highest of all of them at $2,000. However, it means fewer artisans. And this is an incentive for some of these fewer younger kids to not go into a treadle loom tradition, but to take up the backstrap loom. And the silk producing backstrap loom Santa Maria del Rio community has official support. They're the only ones that they make sure that the silk gets imported into Mexico, and they have a school, they now have a small museum, and maybe this is why Tenancingo has opened up a semi-private place. What other things have I done? Well, some of those of us, some of you present today have been a part of these seminars, a national seminar with artisans, with rebozo producers, with fringe makers, doing exchanges of knowledge, of questions, of open tables, workshops for people who say, I love rebozos, I don't know how to wear one. Okay, here. And there are young people now promoting the rebozo to carry babies. There's even a certificate program in Mexico. Study buying tours. This is also bringing the potential buyers to understand everything I've just told you right now in living color and incentivizing buying. Here at the end of the 2015 event, these are all of the artisans who participated, all sizes, all ages, both the fringers and the weavers. And here we have celebrity endorsement. We have Don Evaristo putting a beautiful rebozo on Susana Harp, who is a singer, and she's right now is a senator for Mexico and is working very hard on getting laws enforced for laws passed for cultural appropriation. Here we have, what are the strategies? Don't bargain from the maker. It hurts his dignity. Many of the early tour, I don't know if they're still doing it, but the tour books say barter. It's fun, it's a game. Well, it might be a game with a middleman. It's not a game with a producer. And that's why I'm very careful to say, don't bargain from the maker. It hurts his dignity. Let's honor our elders as an example for the younger generations. Purchase rebozos and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marta, for that impassioned journey you've taken us on from a life advocating for these things. It's a potentially arcane subject to those of us who don't spend a lot of time with textiles, and you made it come to life, and you've shown us how these intriguing survivals from the 19th century collections of the church family help us to connect to all this rich 21st century advocacy work you're doing. So we'll get into all of that. Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. If you're not already a member of the Olana partnership, please consider joining. You can do that at olana.org/membership. Some of you have already been entering questions in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen and sending friendly messages in the chat. I'll pass on to Marta that your friend Hillary Steele said how much she enjoyed this talk, and our friend Dr. Christine Oaklander, our historian, said you are a treasure of Mexico doing such important work and keeping these skills and traditions alive. So our invisible audience out there has greatly enjoyed your remarks. So I have some questions, and then we'll see if others pop up here. I thought maybe we would start where we ended with the current plight and possibility of this practice in Mexico. And you've had such an interesting path in that. You've gone between the Ministry of Education and then private non-governmental organizations. It occurs to an outsider looking at this tradition that sometimes when the government gets involved, it has a risk of standardizing and imposing a single unified vision on a really diverse folk practice. How do you think about that? The role of public versus private support in advocating for the future of this? You've seen the possibilities of both sides.
Yeah. And I've been in there. When you're in the government, the most frustrating thing is you can't close cycles. You know, each project or program has a cycle. You have to go do A, B, C, D, E, and evaluate. And the money is never there on time, and there's a lot of politicking. And I always felt a lot of frustration. As I went up the ladder, and then when I was the executive director of popular cultures, and then it was my turn to make decisions, it changed, not because I was better or worse, but I could understand that being in decision-making levels is where it is to be in the government, to be perfectly honest with you, Will, and with everybody else. And yet, I pointed out that Santa Maria del Rio, where the only community that does the silk rebozos, they have constantly maintained official help, support to that community. And it's amazing because it's part of their identity. They really, doesn't matter if the political party changes, it doesn't matter what the economic situation is, they're always making sure that the silk is there. And they also have a lot of the marketing strategies too. So they're an exception. And I've tried to use San Luis Potosí, the state, as an example to the other states, but they don't like to be compared very much. And unfortunately, then when you go back into the nonprofit sector and you say, okay, let's try to do it the right way, then you come into two kinds of situations. One is the funding has to be sustained and it has to be long-term. This thing of asking for a yearly grant is very hard. Well, I should be telling you, Will.
I know what you mean, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so when you're able to get a 3-year grant or a 10-year commitment, then you're able to stabilize, prioritize and say, these are projects that are worthwhile. And you're pushing there and pushing. And hopefully you can let go because there are so many crafts, so many needs that you don't want to spend your whole life just on one thing. So the nonprofit sector right now is being undermined by the present president, basically the president. He says we're a bunch of that we live off the people that we're supposed to serve. So he's putting in a big wrench into nonprofits.
I see. I wonder if you might be willing to speculate with me a little bit. We don't have a lot of textual evidence about what the church family saw in these things, but if we could tie it back toward these historic objects in the Olana collection, I wonder from your unique perspective on this material, are you seeing evidence of other 19th century travelers bringing back rebozos to the US? Do you have any thought about how such a traveler, 1881 to 1899, would have encountered these things? Is it street sellers, a very loose, fluid practice, or is it a more established market? And what do you think they would have seen in these objects? I know it's impossible to really know.
Well, I've seen some rebozos that are similar, not all 8, but that are similar to the Olana rebozos in England at the British Museum and the V&A Museum. And I'm making a sort of trying to find a connection. And I spent a few days at the British Museum Library with a librarian, and we went into a very famous archaeologist, I can't remember his first name, Maudsley, brought things back to England, and Christie brought things back to England, and they have some notes of where they bought them. Now we have to understand everybody was wearing them. The women were wearing them. So this was something that as a woman, you were seeing them. And of course, if you were going to go into a church, you had to wear one too. You had to buy one and wear one. So you've got that as a framework. And then I don't think they were going to the communities where they're made. The communities where they were made and then they were distributed through different parts of Mexico or to the areas, to the middlemen, because otherwise it would be much easier to do attribution. And Virginia Davis, who is here, and hello, Virginia, many kisses, has always stressed how frustrating it is to attribute where the rebozo was bought to where the rebozo was made. And that's one of the big subjects that we have to do more research. I think if as young people and as archives are better organized, for sure things will start coming out.
Understood. We have an interesting question here from former chair of our board, Kay Toll, who's given a long service to Olana. She's been particularly connected to Japanese art over the years, and she raises an interesting idea. Are you aware of the Japanese designation of national living treasures? And I wonder if that could be something that would be helpful to your weavers. Is that something that Mexico has explored?
Well, it happens in a very different way because our culture is very different. I mean, we've got thousands and thousands of craftspeople. And I was in Japan and I went to the Yanagi Museum and I was very interested in finding out more about the living treasures. We have a private bank, the Banamex Private Bank, that created a program that is called the Great Masters of Mexican Folk Art. And they give them they gave them an incentive and they work with them. The government, the Mexican government has one of the most outstanding public policies in the world for contests. They're constantly doing contests, either a general contest, a special rebozo contest, and they give first, second, third place. And so they incentivate so that young people and innovators can start winning prizes and then go on to the next level. So even though they're not named a living treasure, it points in the direction of incentives. And the highest award would be the equivalent of the Presidential Medal of Honor. In Mexico, it used to be the National Arts and Science Award. It's now been divided into the National Science and Technology Award and the National Arts Award. And that is recognition for your life's work, not for presenting a piece at a contest. So that is our sort of the way we work it in Mexico City, in the country. It may not have the weight of being a living treasure. However, I think it's equivalent.
That makes sense. A private solution instead of a public one. And we can connect you with Kate Toll if you're interested in discussing more. She's an interesting person. We had another question come in earlier that I was not surprised by. I've encountered those fascinating Costa paintings before, and Clayton Kirking, one of our attendees here, was really intrigued by that body of visual culture that are so rich and so problematic. And now you've helped us to see them in a new way, also a really useful source on the historic use of rebozos. This term caste is fresh in everyone's mind these days because of this devastating new book by Isabel Wilkerson, Caste, the Origin of Our Discontent. So we've been thinking about the historic problems of caste in this country, and you've shown us the incredibly strictly codified caste system of Mexico. Could you help our audience to understand that a little bit better?
Well, when the Spanish arrived, some women came with them, but the Spaniards took on indigenous women as, if not official wives, they had children with them. So the first caste is the mestizo, the child born of a Spanish father and an indigenous woman. And then as the society became more complex and the African slaves arrived, well, then they started mixing with the indigenous, with other mestizos. And so you've got another series of combinations. They're considered racial attributes. And yet part of the problem is that they appear in the paintings, seem to have been in the churches, yet they're not in the official Spanish lore of a caste existing. So you've got Indians, pure blood, supposedly, Spanish, pure blood, criollos, who are Spanish, born in America. And then you've got this very up to 56 different categories of castas, of this one with this one gives you this and this one. And one of them is you jump backwards. the product is a jump backwards. And so you've got four basics, which would be the white Spanish, the indigenous, the black, and the Asian. These would be the four basic, and then there's all of this mingling and mixing. Now, there were a lot of problems you had to prove in order to be able to get ahead in New Spanish society. You had to prove your pureza de sangre, that you weren't mixed blood. So there were a series of things that were happening in order for you to be able to advance. The 1821 movement of independence did away with the castas, but not here. I mean, we're talking about 2020, almost 2021, and the amount of discrimination and racism in Mexico is terrible. If you've got Black features, especially for the indigenous people, there is a not coming to terms with the indigenous people. If you're pre-Hispanic and you built these wonderful, beautiful pyramids, you're great. But if you're today's Indian, you're dirty. I wouldn't want to mix with them. There are many derogatory terms. And there's a national commission against discrimination and racism, and the same issues keep coming up. So we have our own set of challenges with discrimination and racism.
Understood, as do we all. I understand that our friend and patron saint of Olana Rebozos, Virginia Davis, would like to activate her own microphone here. So let's see if we can get her in to say a few words. Margot, are you? There we go. Now you're unmuted. Virginia, join us.
Yeah, well, Marta, what a deep presentation. So wonderful, just marvelous. I have to say that Martin, my husband, and I used to take weekend trips, up the Hudson and all. Of course, we're going to go to Olana, and I see all these beautiful shawls, and I say Rebozo. And then later on, and I must say that Deborah Troop, people were extremely helpful because the shawls were attributed to the Middle East. Well, in any case, the rest is history because I was privileged to write about them and did that study. Well, I also wanted to point out that during the first Cardenas administration, I believe it was Dr. Atl, started the school in Santa Maria del Rio, and people still go to that school and among other things, learn backstrap and rebozo. Now, the following thing, Hilary Steele, a very wonderful artist and weaver, she and I have documented Don Evaristo's process of making the rebozo, and also the fringe making. If people want to have it sent to them in the clouds, and it takes a while for it to descend, please send me some email, Virginia at EIPYE.com. And I have to say to the people at Olana, you are really also so wonderful, because it's such a beautiful place. And I urge when we could all travel again, make it your #1 destination. So thank you. Marta. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to point out that Virginia is, just as Don Evaristo was 93 on Monday, Virginia turned 91 last August 20th. So we're blessed with these living treasures. And I did not point out that both Hilary and Virginia apprenticed and learned the very intricate backstrap loom weaving of Tenancingo with him. And I think that, you know, it's a way of getting the word out and documenting and working from another perspective that's very important. So
wonderful to have you tuning in here, and thanks for your kind words about Olana. Thank you for helping us to understand these objects better. What we can do is actually share a link to that video you mentioned with everybody who attended this webinar. We do a little follow-up email, so I'll reach out to you, Virginia, and we'd love to see that material. I think we are coming up on the end of our time, and we didn't get to all possible topics, but I thought maybe one fun topic to end on would be, could you tell us what you're wearing there, Marta? You seem to be showing us an example of your studies. Is that something interesting?
Yeah. Well, this is a shawl, not a full rebozo. It's a shawl that Don Evaristo made for me and gave to me as a gift after the 2013 first national seminar that I did. And he was very excited. He said, oh, the FRANZ MAYER, just to be in the FRANZ MAYER for him was, you know, the top of the top. And then I have a cut-up rebozo necklace here.
Oh, cool.
A cut-up that was Maggie Galton from Honora's idea. Now the whole village is doing these cut-up things. So I'm sort of on the rebozo theme today.
There we go. I wonder why. That's perfect. Modeling your commitment to this craft. Well, yes. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I see somebody saying this would be a good idea for the Olana Museum store. Yes, indeed. So we're going to have to get on that.
We'll work on that.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your passion and your knowledge with all of us. It's been a real pleasure. Thank all of you for joining us and supporting Olana.